Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal. So yes, it's a new year. I have a new hat. This hat's not staying here for the whole show. So we'll just go with it. This is not straight. Turn. There we go. Happy New Year, everybody. Woo! We don't have to worry about that shit anymore. I just hit the camera. That's fine. Welcome to the GCTV Robservation. I'm your host and master of ceremonies, Darkside Rob, and this is your twice a week wonderfulness where I spew words into a camera via a microphone and share my thoughts and information on the video game industry at large to you wonderful people out on the interwebs watching on YouTube or on Twitch. It's good to have you here in 2017. The new year is upon us. We have reached the beginning of a new cycle of video game releases. And yet, we still have a couple of things to discuss with regards to 2016, which include one thing that I specifically want to have a observation about this week. And in fact, I should let you guys know this is going to be a very special 3-part observation that's releasing today, Wednesday, and Friday. And is going to include what I'm going to talk about today and the next 2 observation casts, which is a complicated way of saying I need more time than one observation can sustain to get the point across about what I want to talk about, which is video game soundtracks. And the reason I want to talk about video game soundtracks is because one thing that I plan to do more of with this channel is focus not just on video games, not just on playing games, not just on talking about games, but talking about the behind the scenes and the pieces of the puzzle that go into these awesome video games, and specifically dealing with video game music, because I, as some of you may already know from the Twitch streams and from music that I've released on SoundCloud and hopefully soon to release on Bandcamp, I am a musician. I am a pianist. I am a singer. I am a composer, songwriter. I write for different styles of music, including. I write for the music is including. That's not. I write music for a lot of different musical genres, including rock, jazz, and specifically electronic music in the style of classic video games that I absolutely love. Some of my favorite artists include people like Disaster Piece, Austin Wintory, Big Giant Circles, Zircon, Tiasu. Trying to think of anybody else that I might have forgotten. Did I say Big Nick? I think I said Big Nick twice. There might be other. There's a lot of artists. I have a whole big list filled with Carpenter Brute, Dance with the Dead. There's a whole lot of others out there. Austin Wintory. I said Austin Wintory, right? Damn it. But yeah, so I like to focus on some of the amazing soundtracks that are out there in the video game world. And I wanted to talk about a couple of them that really hit me this year before I jump into my top 10 games of 2016, which I will be releasing a video on Wednesday with my 10 to 5, 10 to 6, 10, 9, 8, 7, and then Friday will be 5 through 1, and then Saturday will be the end of the year Crash Extravaganza, which we're going to do our roundtable discussion with members of the GC TV streaming cast of characters. Will include myself, Mr. Sean Marks, Mr. Blake Rice, and Mr. Jason Perioni. That's not his last name. His real name is Perini. I just like calling it Perioni because it sounds like the beer. Anyway, you know, it's Italian. It's a Perioni. But it's like the pizza and a Perioni and yada, 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 whatever. Yada, yada, yada is not Italian either. But some of the soundtracks that I absolutely loved from this year are Over My Nya and Over My Hya. And that's Abzu and Hyperlight Drifter, respectively, from Mr. Austin Wintory and Mr. Disaster Piece, whose nom de music is the only name that I can remember right now. He does have a real name. It's not, it didn't just like get born and, you know, go into the delivery room and they're like, we're going to name our son Disaster Piece. We're naming this guy after his grandfather, Mr. Disaster Piece III. No, that's not how that worked at all. The thing about soundtracks is that it seems to be one of these parts of video games that has always been important, but only in like the last couple of years that people really started to appreciate what composers in the video game space do. It used to be one of these things where it wasn't really something that was, you know, lauded or appreciated or, you know, revered. To some people in the video game space, it's still not seen as a particularly important part of a video game experience. But the thing that's really interesting about now versus, you know, let's say even just, you know, in the last 5 years, is that when you look at the video game space and how people are selling soundtracks and artists are retaining the rights to sell their soundtracks on third-party websites, and Bandcamp has become such a big supporter of video game composers and video game music, and all of this shift, even on Steam, where people are selling the soundtracks with the games, it makes me feel really good about where soundtracks are going as an important part of the conversation of video games, and not just that the music is there, but is it doing something interesting? Does it work with the soundtrack? Does it stand by itself? Can you listen to it on the subway, or is it one of these things that it's just completely linked, and to pull it apart from the game, it just sounds odd? Like, a lot of people were talking about the Doom soundtrack this year, and the Doom soundtrack is fantastic, but honestly, when I listen to it on its own, it doesn't resonate with me the same way outside the game as it does inside the game, whereas the Hyper Light Drifter soundtrack, which I think is not nearly as musically cohesive as, let's say, the Fez soundtrack, which is just beautiful music on its own right. The Hyper Light Drifter soundtrack is so much more of a score in the traditional sense of the word, in that I always felt when I was playing Hyper Light Drifter, it was scoring, it was musically embellishing and creating texture to moments that scored the scene, that basically set the tone for what you were seeing and gave you sort of a feeling as to what you should be experiencing in that moment. In the same way, Austin Wintory's soundtrack in Abzu also denotes emotion in certain places, and these swells and these, like you riding the waves and the tide and this oceanographic environment. But on the other hand, it's much easier to listen to away from the game, as opposed to, I think, another great score he did this year, which was the Banner Saga 2, and he's done the score for both Banner Sagas thus far. And while I think those are great soundtracks, I find them difficult to listen to on their own, because they really do evoke a sense of this sort of Viking era fantasy world on the brink of, collapse. And it's interesting when you look at the separation between this game and that game, and how their soundtracks work or don't work. Like, I've watched people play Thumper. I have not played Thumper personally, but every time I listen to that soundtrack, I just start getting like heart palpitations, and I just kind of go, oh, this doesn't seem like a very pleasant experience. Bum, 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 as that little beetle thing is like slamming into the walls. And there's something charming but also otherworldly and terrifying about Thumper as a game with with a music soundtrack and all that stuff. You look at all of these soundtracks, you put them all together, and when you think of movie soundtracks tend to feel very similar to one another, aside from a couple of very well-known examples like the Blade Runner soundtrack or the Dune soundtrack, or I'm trying to think of one that's a more recent example, like some of the Harry Gregson-Williams soundtracks, like Spy Game, which was much more Harry Gregson-Williams, in a lot of his music tends to write more electronic-based scoring in some of his music. But the video game soundtrack, as it goes with music and scoring like that, has been incredibly diverse in just the breadth of what it's offering. Its player base and what people are listening to while they're playing these games. And I kind of love to find that there's some soundtrack for every type of video game player, for everybody who's playing a game that resonates with them, and the soundtracks always highlight different emotions that people are feeling when they play those video games. And it's really fucking cool that that's the case, because honestly, if there's something that you can always be sure is a universal truth about video games, is that because you're working in a virtual space where there are no limits, where you can do whatever you want, you can basically create whatever type of game you can think of in your mind, it allows for these musical possibilities that are just awesome. And I think it really gives people who love to be creative with music the permission to play with musical ideas that might not work in a more grounded medium like film. I say grounded with air quotes because I know there's a lot of ridiculous films out there too. But a couple of years ago, I would have called you crazy for saying like, hey, Rob, in 2017, most of the music on your phone is going to be, or most of the music that you're carrying around with you is going to be from video game soundtracks, or it's going to be from, chiptune inspired music, or it's going to be from, artists whose inspiration comes from, sounds that were built on, crazy synthesizers from the 70s and, layered soundscapes of weird, sort of droning effects, crazy, heavy, fucking wild, it's like, and I love that shit. And it took me a long time to come to it. And now when I find it in games that I love, it makes me love them even more. And Hyper Light Drifter is one of those perfect examples for me of a soundtrack. I think I've given Disaster Piece, between Austin Wintory and Disaster Piece, I think I've split them both evenly down the middle of games that I've given soundtrack of the year for. And then there's another guy, Chris Christodoulou, who did the soundtrack for Risk of Rain, one of my favorite, all-time favorite music soundtracks. It's a brilliant soundtrack. And he's a cool guy, and you should check out his music because he actually released the stems of his tracks from Risk of Rain, which is basically like each instrument is split out in its own audio channel so that you can take it and remix it and remaster it. You can make your own music with it, and you can also take it into an audio program like Pro Tools or Ableton Live or something like that and see what all the individual channels sound like and turn the levels off and, turn the channels off and listen to each voice individually, which I think is just such a cool thing to do if you want to help people find out how to do this stuff themselves. And I think the one thing that sort of makes it all sort of that much more engaging to me is that the barrier to get into all this stuff for people who are looking at this and going, man, I want to fucking do that. That's cool. If you have a laptop and a single program with one synth in it, you can make music. This is something that I want to focus on this channel and on my other channel, the DS Audioverse channel and my own personal channel, is that, making music and the act of making music starts with the doing of it. Just sitting in front of something, banging away at the keys, making sounds, recording it, and seeing what comes of it. That's the starting place for music. And I think what the result has been in the last several years with regards to music in the video game industry has just been absolutely phenomenal. And I cannot wait to see what's coming next. I mean, one of my absolute favorite soundtracks from this year has also been The Last Guardian, which I've been playing recently on the Twitch channel. And that's a very traditional sort of evocative score, really taking, its cues from movies and films and things like that. But I gotta say, I love the breadth of musical expression being shown in the video game industry. And I think if you appreciate video games and you love playing video games and you're not really a musician, but you appreciate what people are doing to sell a moment in a video game, take a moment and really listen to the sound that's going on in a game, not just the visuals, because the visuals in games are fantastic. But sometimes I feel like the audio elements in games get a tad overlooked. And, there's something that can really be, sometimes you can really benefit from putting on a pair of headphones and listening and letting the soundscape sort of, go over, from one side of your head to the other. It really becomes a fascinating experience, especially in a game like Abzu, where the score sort of evolves with the aquarium that you're swimming through, and the sound and the bubbles and the rush of air moving back up towards the surface and the fish that are swimming by at high speed, and the way the environment is shifting and changing, and how the interplay of the music and the sound design affect one another. Sound design in video games has only gotten better over the years, and especially when you think back at what sound design and music was in like the good old days of video games, where it was a single processor chip that was used to create all of the sound, the entire sound engine and the sound effects and the music, and you were limited to how many voices you could use, and trying to find and come up with creative ways to make sound effects happen and use instrumentation from a digital source, from an analog source, no samples, just a chip that made noises. We're talking, Commodore 64, Game Boy chipset, the NES, the Super NES, the cards, the chips on the Genesis, those pieces of hardware used to make things that sound musical. It's not all that different from analog synths and analog circuitry and the large scale with a synthesizer being used to the same effect in rock and roll music in the 70s and 80s. And it's fascinating when you think about where music has gone from to where it is now. But then to sort of, skip ahead to now and have to sort of go back to where we were, where soundtracks are now emulating the classic sounds using stuff like Super Audio Cart. It's just, the cycle keeps continuing. And now people are going back to analog again and recording analog circuitry on analog gear. There's like a whole new resurgence of analog gear out there. And the way people are making this music is just, it's fascinating, and I love it, and I love hearing what people are doing on video game soundtracks. And I think everybody should really take a moment to look at what people are doing with the music space with regards to video games and listen, and not just look but listen, because I think you'll find and you'll appreciate even more what you might already love about video games, that the creative element of how these games are made and the fact that they ever even work is just a fascinating thing to witness. Not The Witness, which is a video game, which I also thought was good, but had no sound for the most part. So yeah, I think that's going to do it for this Robservation. I hope that was something that interests you. I'm going to talk more about this topic in the future, because I think video game music is really important. And when I talk about my top 10 list this week, expect me to mention a lot of games based not just on visuals, but on music, which is how my top 10 list really comes together. It's not that it's just gameplay or just visuals or just music. It's usually a result of, looking at all of those pieces of the puzzle. Again, it's video games are not just a visual medium, but they're an oral medium as well. And I think that's something to remember and keep an eye and an ear out for. So with that, I want to thank you guys for watching this episode of The Robservation. Be sure to stay tuned Wednesday and Friday for my 2-part top 10 list of 2016, and be sure to keep an eye out for some channel updates as to the exact starting time for the end of the year, Game of the Year, Crash Stravaganza 2017, 8th in a row, 8 years running we've been doing this damn thing, and it's pretty fucking unbelievable, and I look forward to seeing all of you there. If you guys want to find out what we're doing here and all around the web, you can check out the links down below in the description. I'm also going to be posting a link to a fantastic podcast. It's a 4-hour-long podcast from the wonderful guys over at Rebel FM. If you don't know who they are, you should definitely check them out. They are a great podcast that's been going on a really long time, and every year they do a music retrospective show. I'll put the link in the description. 4 hours of video game music from 2016. It even had stuff in it that I had missed. So I definitely recommend you guys checking it out if you want to find out more about some awesome music from this year. This past year, it's 2017 now, 2016. You know what I meant. If you guys want to find out what we're doing here across the internet, be sure to follow us on Twitter and on Facebook and on Instagram and on other places that will show up in the description down below and right here between my hands that are outstretched like this. And last but not least, be sure to check us out on twitch.tv/GameCrashers to find out when we're doing more episodes of the Robservation and the Random Cast. And I will be playing something on there most likely several times throughout the week. So with that, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you like what we're doing here on the channel, please be sure to like the video. If you like the channel as a whole, please be sure to hit the subscribe button. We really do appreciate it. It helps us out a lot. And that's going to do it for me. So I'm just going to go right into the motto, which you already know, is keep playing those video games. Stay safe, everybody. Be good to each other. I will see you guys on the next episode of The Robservation on Wednesday. Till then, have fun. Have a happy, healthy, wonderful, fantastic beginning of your new year in 2017. Until we meet again, peace out, friends. I made it under the time limit because, woo!